from Churchill that says, in the little blurb there underneath the heading, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And so that's a great, in other words, and that really kind of comes from, in my mind, I think about Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There's a time to be born and a time to die. And it says there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. And we need to I guess the right way to say, we need to learn how to be wise, to know when to speak and when to be silent. And many times that is difficult. I can just by way of example, there are times when things arise in the church, and I don't mean like in this church. I mean in the church at large, where issues can arise, and sometimes things need to be said, and then sometimes things need not to be said, or nothing. I should say nothing needs to be said. And sometimes it's wise for us to consider, do I need to be the one to speak, or do I need to let others speak? We had kind of a situation like that that involved me and some of my really good friends in Sevierville, and we sat and we talked and we prayed about it, and I talked to them and with one situation in mind. And because of the relationship that I had with some of the people involved, I spoke. But other people that maybe have been more directly involved did not speak because they didn't have the relationship with the people, other people involved. And so the decision was made that some should speak and some should hold their peace, and it worked out very well. And so. And it wasn't because I was the one speaking. What I'm saying is because we were deliberative about what action we wanted to take, and so we need to be careful. Sometimes we do need to speak, and then sometimes we need to be silent. And I'm also reminded of the phrase that sometimes silence is golden, but other times it's just plain yellow. In other words, sometimes it's wise not to speak, and sometimes it's cowardly not to speak, and those are always difficult situations. The writer of Proverbs said in Proverbs 26 and verse 4, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like unto him." But then in the very next verse it says, "But answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit." Well, now you got to make, these things are not contradictory to one another. In other words, there's a time to answer a fool, and there's a time not to answer a fool. In other words, sometimes people say things that are so patently false and obviously false that they don't need to be answered. But sometimes people can say things, for example, let's just say about religious matters or about the church and poor mouth the church. Well, when those types of things come up, then we have to speak. Because the church doesn't speak for itself, not in any real sense other than when we speak for her. And so learning when and how to speak is a part of the ears of the encourager, because it's based on what we hear. And then I also thought, looking at the opening line, it says, of all the skills needed by an encourager, listening is arguably the most essential, and it is also the most difficult. That is because listening is more a matter of the heart and mind than of the ears. And mastering the art of communication requires not only hearing, but also understanding and caring. In other words, learning how to listen. There's an old story about an Indian who was in New York City, and he was walking down the sidewalk, and he stopped, and he said to his companion, he says, "Do you hear that cricket?" And the guy's like, "What?" Streets are full of people. There's cars running up and down the road, and you know what it sounds like? There's motors roaring and horns honking. And he said, "Yeah, there's a cricket." And he saw a little shrub, just nearby, and he went through and he peeled back the limbs of that shrub, Sure enough, there it was, a cricket. He'd heard that cricket. Nobody else had heard it. He said, how do you hear that? He said, how did you hear that? He said, because I've learned to listen for crickets. In other words, that's something that's a part of what I do. That's something that I listen for or appreciate. He said, that's amazing. He said, not really. He says, we're all trained to hear certain things and respond accordingly. He said, what do you mean? The Indian took a quarter out of his pocket and dropped it on the sidewalk, and immediately about 50 people stopped and started looking. Well, the quarter wasn't any louder than the cricket. But in other words, the cricket could have been heard if their ear was tuned to it. But the sound of money hitting the concrete perked up their ears. And so neither one louder than the other, but what is our mind in tune to hear? And then I always think about this. I hear everything when I'm deer hunting. Everything, except deer. I mean, that's for real. I mean, I can hear a squirrel walking a half a mile away. I can hear a sparrow or a little old thrush tearing up and it just gets me all excited. Here he comes. And then there's some little old bird or chipmunk or whatnot. And then next thing I know, I'm sitting there halfway dozing off, and I look up and right there in front of me, there it is. Where'd that deer come from? I heard the 4-ounce bird, but I missed the 100-pound deer. And that thing didn't fly in or float in, but it's just amazing. It's amazing how you can tune in and tune out. And so I thought about all of those things, just thinking about having the ears of an encourager. And I love this opening point, that listening involves determination. Listening involves determination. Not the first paragraph, but in the second paragraph that goes into the next page. It says, listening appears to be easy, but looks can be deceiving. If listening is so simple, why are there so few good listeners? What percentage of people with whom you converse are proficient in this skill? And then question, how accomplished are you at listening? Communication is not as effortless as it may seem at first. As stated earlier, competency requires commitment. In other words, we have to be committed to being good listeners in order to develop the skills to be listeners. Looking at the not the next paragraph, but the next one that says the level of communication. The level of communication that takes place in most conversations is superficial, to say the least. Now think about that. The level of communication. Now communication involves both the speaking and the hearing. It says that the level of communication is superficial, shallow, to say the least. And the reason is because most people enjoy talking much more than listening. All right, so if people enjoy talking much more than listening, then what is their mindset while they're listening?
Thinking about what they're going to say next.
That's right. Well, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next, or how I'm going to respond to what this person is saying. It says frequently they will simply take turns speaking without anyone paying serious attention to the other's message. Conversation is typically not dialogue, but two concurrent and competing monologues. In other words, one says a thing, and then another says a thing that might be related to it, but each one takes turns talking, but neither one's listening. Either one just is saying what he or she wants to say. Now you can put this to the test. This is a very simple way to put this to the test. And I do this all the time at Eastside Grill. That I'll sit at the liar's table with all the men that are there. That's what they call it. We call it the table of truth. Because the only thing gets told at our table is truth. But other people call it the liar's table. And there'll be 8, 10, 12 of us sitting around this big gathering of tables on the right as you come in. And I just sit and just watch and observe. And one guy starts to tell a story, and the moment he pauses, somebody else takes it up, and tells a similar story or something that happened to him that's kind of like that. Now, the first guy's not finished yet, but the second guy starts talking, and when he gets his breath, if the first guy's taking a sup of coffee, when that guy gets his breath, then the third guy's going to jump in. And by the time you get back to the poor sap that started the story, you've already changed subjects 4 times. And it's not even worth it to finish your story because you're not even talking about the same thing anymore. I mean, it may not even be remotely akin to what you're talking about. I mean, you can go from talking about, from talking about like, just say, just say you work. Let's just say you work in construction, and pretty soon somebody starts talking about construction, but it involves a truck. And then somebody said, well, I had a truck like that. And then it gets to be on trucks. And then before you get to trucks, you talk about body shops where you get your trucks fixed. I mean, it's hilarious and sad all at the same time. I guess, but nobody cares because that's just the way that it goes every day. It goes that way every day. You go to a family gathering. I challenge you. Go to a family gathering where there's more than at least 4 or more people at the dinner table. And just resolve to watch and listen and watch how things progress. And you tell me if anybody gets to finish their story. If anybody gets to finish their story. And I'll just about guarantee you, nobody gets to finish their story. Is that right or is that right? Because I haven't seen anybody shaking their head because everybody's nodding their head. They know that that's exactly how it goes. And one reason we know that's how it goes is because all of us at some time have wanted to tell a story. And we got cut off. And we didn't get to finish our story. Right? But at the same time, it may well also be the case that we cut off somebody that wanted to tell a story. And it all goes back to the art of listening. The art of listening. I've told y'all that it's been 25 or 30 years ago. The highlight of the weekend for me at my family reunion was listening to my grandpa and his 3 brothers tell stories about growing up in Marion County in the 1930s and 40s. Well, actually, for my grandpa in the teens. He was born here in 1911. And to hear them tell the stories, and we just sit, just kind of like little kids, and listen to these men tell stories about days that we can only imagine, in our minds, and can only picture because we have no idea about what their experience was. And so, but that's the way things used to be all the time. The old folks would get around and tell stories, and young folks would sit on the floor and listen to their ancestors, tell about the family history and how they got to where they were. And so, listening involves determination. And the only way to get deep into any story is to have a willingness to listen. And then in the next paragraph, after that one, second sentence, being silent is not the same as listening. All right? Just ask my wife. Because I'm a pretty good silencer, but I'm not that great of a listener at times. Look. If I'm watching the Blues play in the Stanley Cup, you probably don't need to talk to me. Except in the intermission. Unless somebody's dying, don't talk to me. Don't expect me to listen to you or remember anything that you had to say. Right? Or if the Cardinals are playing and it's a good ball game. Or if college football's on and it don't even really matter who's playing. You better get my undivided attention. And mute the TV and or turn it off if you want me to have any hope of hearing what you have to say.
Don't text you Saturday.
What?
Don't message you Saturday, right?
Well, Saturday ain't no... This Saturday, I can take it or leave it. Because I got my grandbaby. I have my grandbaby Saturday, so... Yeah, so football is nothing for me this coming weekend. But But the point is that there are any number of things that can distract us from being good listeners. And so if something needs to be heard and listened to and remembered, we better make sure we have people's undivided attention. See, another problem is with this in the modern age is Rhonda walked through the house and she's talking. I don't know if she's talking to me or somebody else. I mean, because her cell phone is Bluetooth to her hearing aids. And so she'll walk around and she'll be talking, and I'm like, I'll be back in my office, which is just one room away, and I'll be going, what? What? I can't hear you. And then all of a sudden, I ain't talking to you. All right? But 10 minutes later, she's walking through the house in the same tone of voice. And so what do I assume? She's talking to somebody else. But guess what? She's talking to me. And guess how much I heard? 0. I heard 0. And what's worse is I'll usually ask her some question. I guess maybe I hear it subconsciously in the back of my mind and I don't know it. Because then I unerringly ask her a question about something that she just said when I wasn't listening. And then I'm really in trouble. I just told you that 5 minutes ago. You didn't tell me that. Oh, yes, I did. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know when you're talking to me and when you're not talking to me. So that's just, that's another danger of modern technology in the listening department. But we need to make sure that just because somebody is quiet, not to assume automatically that they are listening. All right. Secondly, at the bottom of page 76, is that listening is loving. And man, this was really, really a pointed set of paragraphs here. And just listen how this opening line. Just listen to it and take it in. The core problem in failed communication is selfishness. The core problem in failed communication is selfishness. Now, how does that manifest itself? What does he mean by selfishness? Yeah, if it doesn't directly affect me, why do I need to be a part of this? Why should I care? That's right. All right. What else?
I think about Toby Keith's song. It's all about me. His girlfriend's talking and she's talking.
Yeah. What about me?
And everything was about her.
All right. So So a person who's focused incessantly on self is not likely to encourage people to be good listeners. All right? So that's a manifestation of selfishness. Not caring about others is a what does this have to do with me? That's a manifestation of selfishness. It's all about me is a manifestation of selfishness. All right? What's another one? By the way, I didn't even have those two in mind. They're both a lot better than one I had. What about I'm only listening long enough for me to get my say?
That goes back to the story. Go around the table, somebody calls and gets there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about the other person's story. They just know their.
Now, let me. I've been thinking about this all afternoon. I really hesitated to say it, but since I'm going to impugn both genders, I felt safe in doing so. Men and women, being a bad listener is not a man or woman specific problem. Men are bad listeners because men by nature are fixers. In other words, if the spouse comes in and she's had a bad day and she's talking about all the things that's happened with her bad day, what's the guy thinking? I got a way to fix that. So if you'll just be quiet long enough, I'll give you a solution to that. All right. Now the problem is she looking for a solution to that? No, she's not looking for a solution to that. She just wants you to listen. She just wants to vent because because she's really, like in my wife's case, she's really wanted to kill about 15 kids for the last 8 hours. All right? And the very fact that she hadn't choked out 3 or 4 of them in the course of the day is a testimony to her patience. All right? I see Shannon, Stephanie, Jennifer, they all get it. They all get it. All right? So she don't want me to fix it. Number one, because I can't fix it. I don't get to go back down to the school and tell Norman and the school board how to do their jobs. I know how they used to fix it when I was in school. They tore your tail up, or they sent you to the house. Going to school was a right. Was a privilege and not a right. You just didn't get to go and act a fool all day, and people have to put up with you like they do now. But I can't fix it. But in my mind, what am I thinking? I got a way to fix this. But I don't. All right, so men are bad listeners because we're fixers. We want to fix things. All right? Now, women are bad listeners because of their and this is a good thing, because of their natural ability to be empathetic. In other words, to be either empathetic or sympathetic. Because sympathy means if I'm sympathetic, that means something the same or very similar has happened to me, and therefore I can relate. All right? Empathy is much more difficult than sympathy, because you have to try to relate to a person who's conveying to you a situation that you don't have any idea what they're going through. All right? Like if and I found this, for example, very difficult early in my preaching work because, for example, I hadn't lost a parent. So when people lost their parents, it was very hard for me because I didn't understand what that was like. I guess it's been 20 years ago now. Ronnie Hurst's daughter got killed in a car accident down there on the 43, just this side of Ewing. Didn't know how to empathize with him. Diane died, and I didn't know how to deal with Ronnie, and so it made it difficult. Women have a much more natural ability to empathize than men. But the difficulty is that you want to let that person know that you empathize with them. See what I mean? In other words, you want to make that connection, and maybe a little more listening would be helpful before the ability to try to make that connection. And so, and by the way, both of these things are natural. Men are naturally fixers by the way they think very linearly, and women are very naturally empathizers. It's one thing that makes us different. One thing that helps make us what we are. I'm not saying either is bad, but when it interferes with our ability to listen, then it becomes a problem. And so I love it that it says listening is loving. All right, go to page 77. The way a person listens this is at the end of the first paragraph. It says the way a person listens can rapidly and dramatically change the way others feel about him. For example, people that don't know us particularly well, if they find that we have the ability to listen, it automatically draws it's a drawing card, so to speak. It attracts people to us. The ability to listen, and so that's what he's talking about here at the end of this paragraph. And then the very next paragraph: nothing is more encouraging than a good listener, because few things affect a person's self-concept, in other words, how they view themselves, more than the way others react to their words. In other words, if I'm saying something, whether or not I intend to, I am revealing things about myself that I may either consciously or subconsciously do. In other words, I may be aware that I'm doing it. I may not be aware that I'm doing it. But the person who's listening carefully picks up whether or not I intend to, the person who's listening picks up on that. And by the way, learning how to listen also allows us to get to know people much better, because the more we let people talk, the more they will reveal about themselves unconsciously. Unconsciously. I'll give you an example. I don't remember how many years ago it's been, probably at least 6 or 7, which means it's probably been 10 or 11. If I think it's been 6 or 7, it's probably been 10 or 11. But I was in a meeting, gospel meeting up in Forestdale, Missouri, and I meant to call a dear friend of mine up there, and he may be watching later. So Rod, if you're watching this, tell me what that young man's name was. But I was doing a Fishers of Men gospel meeting. In other words, I was teaching the basic principles of the Fishers of Men program in a gospel meeting setting, more of a seminar than a gospel meeting. And there was a young man there, and at that time he was a new Christian. And he worked in a motorcycle shop, and he drove a motorcycle to church. He never missed, and he always was riding his bike to church. And so I was just sitting after services one night. It might have been Sunday night or Monday night. It was early on in the week. And just talking to him, because I found him to be a very interesting individual. He really found the church by accident. Or I might say by providence. He wasn't searching for the true church. He's just looking for a church and just happened to show up at Forestdale. And they sat down and studied with him. He became a Christian. He's been a staunch, just a pillar of faithfulness for all these years. But during the course of this conversation, I just was interested in him. And so he told me all these things about him. So when I got to the part in the Fishers of Men program, like on Tuesday night, I made the point of being a good listener. What we call in Fishers of Men was called evangelistic perception. If you've been in the class, you remember that phrase, evangelistic perception. So being perceptive, people will tell you more than they intend to. Well, he didn't believe that. He said, no. He said, what about a person like me that's shy and doesn't talk much? I said, well, what about you? And then I told him like 10 things about himself. And he said, how'd you know that? I said, you told me. He said, I didn't. I said, you did. I said, how could I know it if you didn't tell me? But he told me a number of things about his little old apartment where he lived and worked in a motorcycle shop and how he came to the church the first time, and like I think it might have been on a Wednesday night. I mean, he told me all these little details about it. Told me about his folks, and I began to tell him all these things about himself after he told me that listening didn't work. And then he was a believer. Then he was a believer. Now, I wasn't fishing for anything. I was just interested in him because I found him to be a very intriguing individual. Because a young guy in his early 20s who never married or and lives on his own is not usually the kind of person that shows up on your doorstep at church, right? And so that immediately interested me. And so, but he figured out that he told me a whole lot more than he ever imagined. And by the way, 3 years ago, when I was at the St. Louis area lectures, he drove way over an hour to hear me preach. And I had a late night session too, like 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, just so we could sit in the parking lot and talk after I got done. He still had a long way to go, to get back home. But it made an impression on him. And so we have an incredible ability to connect to people in a very real and personal way if we learn the art of listening. Note in the third line of that same paragraph that begins with "nothing is more encouraging." Third line down, listening shows the value a hearer places on the speaker, and Christians should make it their aim to regard each person as important. Everybody wants to feel important. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean they want to feel valued. In other words, that they have something to offer. There are a lot of people in this world that don't think they have anything to offer. They're discouraged. They're beat down. Life circumstances have not been good, and yet just the ability to instill in them that we value them, and especially because we value their soul. It says that everyone wants to feel heard, understood, and respected. And when these needs go unfulfilled, the effect on the speaker's ego can be devastating, although the problem rests with the other person. Man, I thought that is so insightful. That a person may feel bad about themselves because I didn't show proper interest in them as an individual. So they feel bad about themselves unduly, but it's not their fault, it's mine. And so I love the insightfulness of that line. Then the next line, the rewards of good listening are abundant. It cements relationships, instills self-confidence, facilitates the accomplishment of worthwhile aims. It says, when it comes to relationships, goodwill is like money in the bank. It's money in the bank. And what he means by that is, when people believe that you have a sincere interest in them, then they are willing also to invest in you. Now, for us as Christians, our goal is ultimately we want to listen to people and create that connection so that we can use that as an opportunity to share the gospel with them. In other words, this person took time to listen to me and values me as a person. Now I got money in the bank, and for lack of a better term, I get to cash out by talking to them about their soul. And they're willing to hear, even if they're not extremely interested in the gospel, they're going to be somewhat interested because they know that I'm interested in them. All right, and so you have that in the middle of page 77. Tell you what, I want to stop right there. Because I really want to get to page 79, because the classic passage on listening is in James chapter 1. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. And so I want us to, and I will touch on some of this on page 78 with the statements that Jesus made about listening, and then we'll do James and Jesus next week, and we'll finish that lesson next week.